Hello, my little possums. I've missed you guys, but I have a really good movie for you today, or a fun one to talk about. So gather round, get some popcorn. I have a movie to share with you. This one is Forever Amber. So it was released in 1947 and it starred Linda Darnell as the titular character, and it was directed by Otto Preminger. It's a historical romance and drama set in the time of the restoration of King Charles II, the 17th century. So Amber, a beautiful redhead, is the illegitimate daughter of two nobles who have to leave her as a baby on the doorstep of a wealthy Puritan farmer when fleeing during the English Civil War. Seeing the name Amber embroidered on her little blanket, her new parents give her that name and raise her as their own. But when she's 16, dreaming of a different, more elegant life, she refuses to marry the man her strict religious father wants her to, and she runs away. On the way, she meets and falls in love with Bruce Carlton, a cavalier, and she follows him to London. There they have an affair, but he refuses to marry her, a country girl with no prospects, which is sad because neither of them know she's really of noble birth. Amber sets her cap at raising her station in life by marrying or sleeping with successively more wealthy men until she reaches the pinnacle of society, but always with an eye one day to convincing Carlton to marry her. So Linda Darnell plays Amber, Cornell Wilde is Bruce Carlton. It also stars Richard Green, George Sanders, Glenn Langan, Richard Hayden, and Jessica Tandy. So originally it was directed by John M. Stahl, but he was replaced during filming by Otto Preminger, who felt that none of the original $300,000 worth, a lot of money at the time, worth of footage could be used. So the film then ended up going way over budget. And it was the most expensive film Fox had ever made at the time. The movie is based on the book of the same name by Kathleen Windsor, which was published in 1944 to huge furor. The book itself was originally 2.5 million words long and went through many, many drafts. In the end, at a fifth of the original manuscript's length, the book is just under 1,000 pages. So it's a remarkable book. The author's first husband was an expert on this era of history, and Windsor did a lot of careful research for the book, and it shows. It captures the changing fashions of the time, both sartorial and social, and takes in events like the plague in London and the Great Fire. The book also includes historical characters of note, like Charles II and his court. The real claim to fame of the book, though, is that it contains, in the words of the Massachusetts Attorney General, 70 references to sexual intercourse, 39 illegitimate pregnancies, 7 abortions, and 10 descriptions of women undressing in front of men. The book was banned in 14 US states and condemned by the Catholic Church. Because of this, it was a huge bestseller and it sold over 3 million copies. And the rights for the book were bought immediately. Windsor herself did not think her book was particularly erotic, saying that she only wrote 2 really sexy scenes, and both of those were cut from the published book. Amber's ability to raise herself up in society, to be courageous, and her survival through various dark historical times, however, earned the book comparisons to Gone with the Wind and its heroine Scarlett O'Hara. Amber's toughness chimed with the vision of women during war, and this aspect was praised. Amber was no shrinking violet. I have read this book, and while it is long, it's not really salacious at all by modern standards. And as you read it, it doesn't feel that long because it's very well paced and there's always something happening. It's quite an interesting book. To me, Amber is kind of reminiscent of the character Moll Flanders from the book of that name, but a bit more nuanced and giving more detail than that book, which is from 1722. The way of life and the things that she has to do or chooses to do are quite realistic to the time, though not often seen or explored from a woman's perspective like this. A final little fact about Kathleen Windsor: the huge popularity of her book made her famous, and she ended up divorcing her husband because she couldn't go back to ordinary married life with him. So remember, in that time, women's roles as wives were quite narrow and prescribed. She ended up marrying Artie Shaw, the famous band leader, and there's a really sort of well-known anecdote about Artie. He loved to put down Ava Gardner when he was married to her, because he liked to play on her feelings of sort of intellectual inferiority. So one day he saw her reading Forever Amber, which was like a huge bestseller, and he gave her such a hard time for reading like such a trashy book. And then he went on later to marry the author of that book, which must have kind of wryly amused her. And I wonder if he ever got around to reading it himself. Either way, his marriage to Windsor, like most of his marriages, was short-lived. So to return to the movie itself, only a month after the book was released, 20th Century Fox bought the rights for $200K, which was one of the largest amounts ever paid at the time. Of course, the movie could not show most of the things that are in the book, and with the book's reputation, they had to be even more careful because the censors were watching them closely. Amber is reduced from having about 30 lovers over the course of the book to just 5. It's no small feat in a film of this era to hint at all the things Amber is getting up to out of wedlock and within it, as well as having an illegitimate child by a lover. She's very bold and seductive, manipulative, sometimes devil-may-care, but there's something about the way that Linda Darnell plays her that's also a bit endearing at times as well. She loves a man who doesn't want to marry her because of her social status. And so the only way she can improve her social standing is in the way that she does, by taking increasingly wealthy and powerful lovers and husbands. The real shame of this is that Amber is actually of noble birth, and she doesn't know it, so she can't turn it to advantage against Bruce. If he knew her parentage, he may have actually considered her as a marriageable prospect, rather than as just a sometimes lover. The movie is quite a lavish affair. The sets feel very full of life and detailed. They have a bit of a romantic storybook historical look to them. And it's wonderful historical fiction. There's highway robbers, romance, a daring redhead, her rise through society, her downfalls and her missteps that nearly cost her everything. The costumes are to die for, with the style of the time like very clearly evoked. There's huge hats, the big wigs, and the wide sort of hoop skirts. Lots of fine fabrics, expensive fabrics like velvet and brocade, embroidery and feathers abound. And there are many, many outfits for Amber. She almost seems to wear something new in every scene, and increasingly more fabulous as she goes further in life and becomes more wealthy. She would have actually made an excellent fashion doll line if Barbie had been invented, but I mean, I suppose Barbie wouldn't want to have been associated with Forever Amber. The costume design was by Rene Hubert, who worked on quite a few films in Hollywood from about the mid-20s to the mid-60s. He was nominated twice for an Academy Award. He did some truly beautiful work, and this film is a wonderful example of it. It feels stylish enough to please a 1940s viewer, but also like fairly accurate to the time period as well. This film had a famous search for its lead star in the same vein as Gone with the Wind, and it was designed to sort of drum up a bit of frenzy around the film and some speculation, as if there wasn't already enough of that. Linda Darnell was an excellent choice for Amber, though she did actually replace an earlier actress who was cast. As I mentioned at the top, filming started on this film and faltered. The studio wasn't really happy with the way the film didn't really seem to gel. So the director was fired, there was cast changes, rewrites, and Otto Preminger slotted over as director. And it just made the film go way, way over budget. Whilst I am like enamored of the performance of Linda Darnell and her many costumes, and with the overall style of the film, there is something kind of missing from this film or the story that keeps it from being, for me, on the same level as some other sweeping historical romance epics, especially ones of the same time period. There are obvious parallels to Gone with the Wind here. I mean, we've mentioned that movie a couple of times. Leaving aside any arguments about that film for now, it had a will they, won't they romance, fiery, determined female lead, historical backdrop, a lot of things in common. But the central relationship in that film has a smolder to it. You knew Rhett Butler saw a kindred soul in Scarlett and that they had feelings for each other at different times. Here, and I know that this is partly down to me talking to you now, and it's like not the 40s, values change. I feel like I can see why the Amber from the small rural town falls for dashing Bruce. But as she loves him over time, I felt kind of bad for her. She's pulling herself up by her bootstraps and she's moving up in the world. She has this determination that I like, and she's kind of wasted on this Bruce guy who doesn't really have that smolder. There's not like this passion kind of thing happening. For him, she's a convenience or an inconvenience sometimes, and it makes the romance one-sided on film. He's always pursued and never pursuing. Maybe I also just feel sorry for anyone who loves someone who doesn't love them back. But yeah, he didn't impress me much, honestly. It's odd really to me that his social climbing makes him seem kind of cold, like his rejection of her for not being from, you know, a higher class of person or however you want to look at it. But her social climbing makes her seem kind of passionate and plucky somehow. I mean, either way, they're sort of morally questionable. At this time, Cornel Wilde was often cast as a bit of a swashbuckling romantic type, so he's actually a good casting choice for Bruce. And I don't think that he's actually bad in this film, but I just never really warmed to the character. Though in the book, when I was reading it, I don't remember getting that same feeling. I think I liked him more in the book, and it just sort of felt a bit more, I don't know, a little bit less of a cold relationship, a lot more sort of warm, a bit more believable and fleshed out. I don't know. But anyway, Wilde went on to work behind the camera as well as in front of it and had a long and distinguished career, which is really cool. And Linda Darnell was an old hand at acting in films by the time she even made this, but she had some setbacks, and after being typecast as a kind of, you know, like the ingenue, nice girl, sort of romantic person, this film helped start what was a revival in her career, allowing her to show another side of herself and her acting ability. So that's pretty cool. And this led to, you know, bigger and better things. But interestingly, she had to endure intense dieting on the film. She had to stay really thin. And obviously that made her ill and very faint. And added into that, she had to endure Preminger's directing, which she didn't enjoy. So despite what you see on screen, I don't think this was a very happy set to be working on. So when the film came out, it was a box office success. Everybody wanted to see it. Most of the cast and crew knew that they were making a film that was meant to sort of pander to a certain audience, those who were curious about the salacious content and the book's reputation, that kind of thing. On release, I mean, like I said, it did really well at the box office. The Catholic Church came out against it, even after all the changes made for it to pass censorship and to appease them. And critics felt like it was all a bit sort of shallow, not anyone's best work. But I think watching it all these years later, you're freed from a lot of the hype that was around it then, and a lot of the expectations and ideas. There's something a little hollow about some aspects of it, but I really like the plotting. The film shows an empathy for Amber at the start of the film. She's living a highly restricted, stultifying life on the farm, and it's not where she belongs. There's only one way out, and that's for her to run. You see her father's paternalism, and you sense her mother's sympathy. Perhaps her own feminine soul was crushed too, and she feels for her adopted daughter, Amber. Amber never really looks back. Her decision made, she just keeps going and follows through. There are not a lot of options for her in that era, and sometimes she's taken advantage of, which I think is such a good aspect of this film. Like, it's not always just a straight upward trajectory. And she faces those setbacks with courage and strength, which I really liked. She's never really a victim, and it's entertaining. She just keeps on going. I loved all these little twists and turns in her story. I mean, it's a little episodic, if I'm honest. But it's fun. She never feels ashamed of herself, and I think that's something quite bold for the time period. She's not apologetic. Added into that, there are some great historical moments and characters brought to life in this film, from the king and the Civil War at the time, scenes in the theater of the time, the different stratas of life that she passes through, and then things like the plague and the fire. Yeah, I mean, at heart, while perhaps a little misguided in her love for Bruce, I mean, in my own opinion, it's an important part of her character that is kind of needed in this film. Anytime he needs her, she'll drop everything and risk everything to be with him and to be there for him. She doesn't shy away from the plague or anything else in order to help him or to save him as required. She's also a mother who loves and provides for their son the best way she can, willing to sacrifice for his best interests too. And she does have a maid in the film who she has quite a sweet and loyal relationship with at times, and who she sort of takes with her. So here's where we get to see this other side of herself, that she's loyal, that she can show kindness to those that she loves, and that she's willing to die for them if needed sometimes. She's not all sort of hauteur and pride and social climbing. And I think that makes for a really interesting dynamic character. So while this film maybe doesn't reach the heights of like the classic strong woman in a historical romance movie in the way that something like Jezebel, or a film I have previously mentioned quite a lot in this so far, it has its flaws, but it's kind of a cool film in its own right. And I actually really enjoy this one, especially for that costume design, that historical atmosphere, and just Linda Darnell's performance. In my opinion, Bruce doesn't deserve you, Amber. If you have seen this film, I would love to hear what you think of it. I think it's one that you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. Or you may have heard some of the sort of stories around it or that kind of thing. So if you've seen it, let me know in the comments. If you plan on watching it, I'd love to hear what you think of it as well. If you love or hate Amber. And yeah, thank you for watching. You can check out some of my other videos. I also have another channel and socials, so you can find links below if you want more of that. And if you want to hang out again, remember to like and subscribe. And you can always leave a comment, let me know what you thought, or let me know what else you might want to see. Thank you.